Good evening, everyone. I'm Alan Schulman. I'm the Director of Graduate Programs in Architecture, and I'm very happy to welcome you to our first Currents lecture of the spring 2019 semester. Currents is a forum for the diversity of voices in the field, and tonight's lecture, Feeling Architecture, is a special privilege for all of us. A special privilege because tonight, the Currents series is a platform for one of our own, or I should say two of our own. Our guest speakers are USOA Associate Professor Jacob Brillhart and his partner, Melissa Brillhart. And Melissa is an alum of the school. Together, they form Brillhart Architecture, a design office based in Miami. Vernacular building principles form the foundation of their work. Often, in their practice, the structure is the architecture, and atmosphere is derived through natural materials and a connection to the landscape. Their aim is to develop innovative construction assemblies that will redefine the relationship between the building, those who live there, and the immediate surroundings, with the goal of developing more natural environments for living. Brillhart Architecture has been honored with many national and international design awards. In 2018, they received the AIA Miami Honor Award of Excellence for their project Thatch House. That same year, Ocean Home listed them as one of the top 50 coastal architects for the third year in a row. Their personal home, Brillhart House, was featured in the BBC World's Most Extraordinary Home series, and which you can see on Netflix, and Dezeen included Brillhart Architecture in the Dezeen 2017 Hot List for the USA. Their work has been featured in the New York Times, Wallpaper, Architectural Record, the Wall Street Journal, among other publications. Jake Brillhart's furniture designs and watercolor paintings have also been exhibited throughout Miami. And in 2016, he published Voyage Le Corbusier, Drawing on the Road. I'm especially happy to have been asked to introduce Melissa and Jake tonight because I admire their work myself. It exhibits a rigorous and thoughtful approach, but it is also not precious. Their approach is experimental in terms of material and technique. And for me, it somehow recalls that mid-century Florida spirit of architects who took an interest in every aspect of a project, from sketches through to construction. Working directly with subcontractors, Jake and Melissa built their house themselves. Just a note, please join us after the lecture in the Corach Gallery, where we'll be opening the exhibition, the Brillhart exhibit, and there'll be a reception, and there will be food as well. So, with that, I'm pleased to introduce Melissa and Jake Brillhart.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all for coming. Wow. And Alan, thank you for that nice introduction in the school, for having us here tonight and letting us present our work. This lecture and the exhibit actually come at a good moment. We've just finished up about 10 buildings, and at this point it's a good time because we can really reflect on what we've done and what we want to do. When I started the office, I would say the office was really working instinctually. We were interested in form, but structure, materiality, vernacular building strategies, and landscape seemed to consistently and naturally find their way into our projects. I think that was simply the result of where I grew up, and Melissa as well, in semi-rural areas, and the fact that I had quite a bit of construction experience. I really understood materials, I really understood how they went together, and having this technical know-how allowed us to take on several projects early on, such as the downtown sculpture and our house. Now that the office has grown and we've had some built work, we are much more cognizant and responsive to the specific spatial and atmospheric qualities in architecture that move or affect us emotionally. We are less distracted by form and more interested in how places feel, the chemistry of space, meaning how different materials make us feel, what the history and memory and patina bring to a place, the importance of lightness, darkness, and shadow, and so on. One of my old teachers used to say to me, Jake, don't tell me what it looks like, tell me what it feels like. So I guess 20 years later, I'm listening, and I kind of get it. We've been looking at other buildings as well as photographs and works of art that embody these ideas. We have looked at current architects, but many of the buildings and paintings that come to mind are ones that are influenced, perhaps unconsciously. They influenced us as children. So tonight's lecture is really an assemblage of images that are somewhat biographical in nature, but are with us as we approach all of our designs. Recently, we came across this book by Olgiati, Images of Architects, where he asks architects to send him 10 important images that show the basis of their work. Images that are in their head when they reflect on the origin of their architecture. In a sense, these first couple of slides are that for us. Interestingly, this diagram, which many of you have, I'm sure, have seen in El Croquis by Alejandro Zatapolo, attempts to define and categorize new forms of architectural practice. One of his categorizations is the material fundamentalists, where he states, quote, they have returned to a tactile and virtuoso use of materials in response to the visual spectacle of the digital age. The work of many of these architects in this group, which you can see sort of off to the right in green, the work really resonates with us, and we show parallel interests in terms of materials and whatnot. But however, I would argue we are that is less of a reaction to the digital culture for us, but something more instinctual and born out of our backgrounds. Speaking of backgrounds, I grew up in Canterbury, New Hampshire, a very small town, which you can see here is a population of 7,000. My mom was an illustrator. My father was a structural engineer, and his pastime was carpentry. So we would spend hours in his workshop or in the woods constructing furniture, forts, and whatnot. We even rebuilt our 1789 farmhouse. This is the house I grew up in Canterbury. We did it room by room. And just down the street was Canterbury Shaker Village. Here I was exposed not only to the simple, restrained structures the Shakers built, which I would argue were both modern and traditional at the same time, but also to the group's inventive nature and complete commitment to quality and craftsmanship. These interiors left an emotional impression on me as well. They are restrained and tempered, are also serene and have a human scale to them. The detailing celebrates the basic structure of things. There is also an incredible quality of light you can almost feel, along with the warmth of the wood stove. The nominal essence of these architectural qualities, straightforward construction, simple forms, and mood create such a powerful sense of place. Here's just another image of Shaker Village. The structure, the anatomy of the architecture, the sort of post and beam logic of construction, as well as the emotional quality of these spaces has been with me since I was a child. My wife, Melissa, who we'll be talking in a little bit, grew up in South Carolina. So the old barns and raised cottages of the South resonate with her, as do they with me too. The pictures here, these are fine art photographs of an artist and sculptor named William Christianberry that exemplify the beauty of these simple buildings. The vernacular quality and honesty of the materials, I would argue, is quite beautiful, but they also possess a sense of history and patina and memory, which I think is an essential ingredient. I would argue, and I think we feel displaced without the presence of history in our environment. And in that same vein, I cannot help but think of the American painters Andrew Wyeth, James Whistler, and Edward Hopper while contemplating architecture through this lens. I'm really interested in the connection between American painting and architecture, and this idea has sort of been slow cooking for some time. Starting at the age of 5, my parents dragged me, I think, to every museum in the Northeast countless times, so I grew up looking at all this work. These paintings really resonated with me. I believed in them. They seemed honest, authentic, natural, and familiar. In revisiting them, I've come to realize that the paintings of landscapes, buildings, and interiors are realizations of a common collection of elements that create an emotional connection for me. In both the subject's material making and the actual representation of the subject, they all convey a sense of history, place and time, texture, temperature, weather, and place within a landscape. The same qualities that you can find in the house that I grew up in, the Shaker buildings, or the Shaker buildings down the street. Now, I just want to take a second and look at a few of Wyeth's pictures in particular. Here you can see he's painting the simple vernacular barn buildings, but you can also clearly see the even northern light, and you can practically feel how cold it is, meaning you can see the weather with the white paint splattered on the snow. He uses earth tones and a muted color palette. It's as if the entire picture has been completely calibrated. Similarly, you can feel the warmth of the light, texture, and material and human presence in this interior. The windows always give a glimpse of what is going, what is going on outside, reflecting the weather and the season. You can also feel the sort of human presence in the space through the furniture and the assorted objects. And Wyeth always used the window. This threshold moment was always incredibly important to him. That mitigates the inside and the outside. And here's another image of that. But most importantly in the work, the architecture is subordinate to the landscape. There are so many more paintings that I've been looking at, but I don't really have time to show you tonight because the lecture is really going to be about our design projects. But I've started to assemble this list of what I call ingredients that make up the chemistry of space. These are common elements that I've mined out of these early American paintings, Shaker buildings, Christian Barry's work, and other buildings that I just simply like. The list is beginning. The list is just the beginning, but I think you get a sense of it. Admittedly, this is a paradoxical form of research. As Mark Wigley said, in his essay, atmosphere is precisely what evades analysis. However, nonetheless, I think that an awareness of these elements has and will inevitably thicken our design work. Travel drawing and painting has always served a foundation for my creative process. And as of late, I've used those ingredients that I just showed to start making new paintings and drawings as a way to explore the more ephemeral qualities of space, aspects that I might have overlooked at an earlier time in my life, when I was mostly focused on the subject itself and its formal construction and details. I'm thinking now, how can we draw and paint that will thus inform future design work that conjures up such atmosphere and emotion? Ultimately, we hope to use these tools. We hope that these tools will help move the work past an aesthetic that is solely about formal expression and into a more dynamic architecture. I'm now going to turn it over to my wife, Melissa, who will talk about the projects. And some of these projects you'll see contain a lot of these trains of thought, and some of them don't, and that they were a little bit more instinctual because they were started when the office was just beginning.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us here. Let me get organized. Okay. So the first project I wanted to touch on was the MoMA PS1 competition. I think this was one of our earliest and more deliberate attempts kind of getting at these ideas of atmosphere. In 2015, we were one of 5 finalists chosen to make a proposal for MoMA PS1's courtyard space in Long Island City. They host an outdoor DJ concert series every summer, and the annual call for us as architects is to design an installation or a refuge for concert goers and museum visitors that integrates seating, shade, and water. And unlike some of the previous PS1 projects, our proposal was not about creating an object in the landscape, but rather about transforming the space as a whole, to create a transporting and multi-sensory experience that would draw you into the depths of your imagination. We used the beach as the setting and conceptual framework. You know, on the one hand, it was just a fun idea for New Yorkers to escape the city, but we also felt that the idea of a beach served as a playground of limitless human experiences. The aesthetic and the sensational perceptions would all be entirely unique, shaped by the different backgrounds, moods, and memories of everyone who came there. We designed a series of physical architectural interventions as well as visual imagery for the beach, associative smells, and tactile elements to create an atmospheric dimension and to engage the senses. And here's a rendering of the space as proposed. We increased the height and form of the existing courtyard walls and wrapped the interior with large format imagery of people floating in the ocean. We also hid misting devices behind the photographs to create the sense of being enclosed in a water womb. We proposed staining the existing gravel to look like pink sand and designed 4 abstracted palm trees. We also integrated smell as part of the experience, pumping the scent of bay rum, salt water, a beach campfire, and a sailboat cabin as different nodes within the courtyard, so as to trigger memories of the beach and also to help navigate people through the space. And then here is a short video that we made. Let's see if I can play that. You know, the project was also a response to the fact that media is now an everyday factor in the urban experience. You know, so often people have their heads buried in their phones, ignoring where they are altogether, or they're too busy taking pictures of themselves, just documenting that they were there rather than actually experiencing the space. And so therefore, drones were integrated to capture photographs of visitors to be posted immediately through social media. They also captured the overall space through aerial photography, which was to be live streamed in the courtyard, offering completely new and otherwise impossible perspectives, vantage points, and ways of understanding one's surroundings. And so with some ambiguity, the project really speaks to the transformation of static urban environments into participatory and performative social spaces. So, put this project together, we worked with some incredible collaborators, including renowned photographer Richard Misrock. We used his on-the-beach photographs, tiling them together to wrap the walls of the 30-foot-tall courtyard. We also collaborated with Berlin-based smell researcher Sissel Tolas to integrate the smells that conjure memories of the beach. And in addition to the video and the renderings, we also designed a number of models and mock-ups to convey the idea. And this image is of the conceptual soap model that we made, and I think this one really, this image certainly just captures the kind of atmospheric notion of the water womb. And then these are just a couple of images of the mock-ups we built for the palm trees. This is just a drawing of all of the design elements together. And here's a technical drawing, one that we made in order to sort of help establish the budget for the project, which was limited to $100,000. And while we didn't win, it gave us a great opportunity to exercise our creativity and to work between the worlds of architecture in a very multidisciplinary way. It also gave us some great exposure in terms of press and including being in the Young Architects Program exhibit at MoMA several years ago. So the next project is our house, which we completed in 2014. This actually predates PS1 and was really kind of what launched our office. The house is located in a historic neighborhood of Spring Garden, which is on the Miami River. This is a historic photograph of the river. It's just about 5 minutes away from where we are. And amazingly, we found an incredible 330-foot-long lot. That's the length of a football field, with some beautiful old trees on the site. So conceptually, we wanted to design a building that truly celebrated the idea of living within the landscape by creating a small pavilion that allowed us to sort of look out and really be a part of our tropical surroundings. And then within that larger framework, we also organized the design around 4 central questions that challenge the culture for building big. What is necessary? How can we minimize our impact on the earth? How do we respect the context of a historic neighborhood? And what can we physically build? Some answers came from a place with which we're already intimately familiar, the seemingly forgotten American vernacular, and more specifically the dog trot, which for well over a century has been a dominant image representing Florida cracker architecture. The building is comprised of 2 enclosed living spaces covered by 1 roof with a central breezeway. The small, simple, and practical building is both modest and rich in cultural meaning, and it also attempts to maximize efficiency, space, and energy, relies on vernacular building materials, and celebrates the breezes. And as with all of our projects, the design is really born out of the plan. So here you can see that our house is a modern interpretation of the dog trot, with living on the right and sleeping on the left, with what is conceptually a central breezeway that we ultimately had to enclose just because of space needs. The principles of tropical modernism also offered direction for us. Obviously, we were looking at Mies and Johnson, but we were really interested in how Paul Rudolph and some of the other South Florida architects took this international style of architecture and allowed it to work within our local climate. You can see the influence of Paul Rudolph's Walker residence on our house in terms of its formal composition, open floor plan, and large indoor-outdoor spaces. But we also looked closely at the work of Robert Bradford Brown and the expansive porch system he implemented at the McClave residence. You know, the sort of fun part about giving these presentations is that you really kind of get to compare yourself to these legends. But what's interesting is that these architects turned to local landscape, climate, and materials to inform their designs, marrying building traditions with passive systems, new technologies, and innovative construction techniques. You know, we had started to do some side research on their work, looking at construction assemblies and materials they used and so on. And they really were working in an era of sort of experimentation and optimism. And in that same spirit, you know, we sought an alternative to the use of concrete and concrete only, instead exploring steel and glass as the superstructure. And as a result, we wasted fewer materials, we simplified the assembly, and reduced the cost and time of construction, all the while allowing for an increased cross-ventilation and a heightened sense of living within the landscape. The interior ultimately acts as kind of an interstitial space between the 2 porches and the front and rear gardens. You can see all the way through the shutters, past the porch, through the house, and beyond to the backyard. And this is kind of another image of that just during the day. But the house also sits lightly on the land. You really don't see the foundation at all, which sort of makes the house look like it floats. But we also wanted it to respond to the tropical climate, and therefore we integrated ideas related to operability, layering, the use of climate-sensitive materials, and a general respect for and celebration of the sun. And I think this image embodies a lot of those ideas. It's essentially a cross-section of layers, including the wooden shutters, the porch, the sliding glass doors, and the curtains are off to the side here. But combined, all of these devices really provide function, but you know, having lived there, we've realized how much they enhance the atmospheric qualities of space and create a very dynamic element to the project. And then there's the use of wood throughout. As a natural material, I think it sort of makes the building feel accessible and somehow familiar, and especially for us who grew up around wood frame buildings. But it also provides something tactile that people are drawn to touch, and even today the smell of wood still lingers. But on the exterior, the shutters are Western red cedar, and the house is clad in ipe. These materials are climate sensitive in that they're naturally termite resistant, but they also weather naturally in the sun, turning a silvery gray. For the interior, we used American cherry throughout. This was for all of the millwork, including the kitchen cabinets, the bathroom cabinetry, the door frames, and the interior doors. And we wanted to use wood to create a very warm environment on the inside. And to our great luck, Jake's dad had been amassing in his barn in New Hampshire a pile of cherry that he had bought at nearby auctions for the past 30 years. And so he and Jake kind of made a road trip of it and drove it down at the onset of the project. Lastly, as Jake mentioned earlier, this was sort of a design-build project where we acted as our own GCs and sort of physically built most of the project ourselves. And here are just a few construction photos. But I think the act of building it has sort of furthered our appreciation for making and material compatibility, as well as an understanding of joinery and detailing. This is an image of one of the wooden doors that we designed and built. And here's kind of an up-close image of the sort of wooden strips and the detailing of the handles on the kitchen cabinets. This is a mock-up of the louvers, which we built ourselves. And just kind of a final image of when it was all said and done. And I think combined, all of these elements really helped sort of create a real sense of place. So the next project I'm going to talk about is the Thatch House. It's a surf camp basically located on the Atlantic coastline of Eleuthera in the Bahamas. Conceptually, it sort of stands in stark contrast to our house, which was sort of about transparency and creating a glass box in the landscape. This project was more about wanting the building to dissolve or meld within the landscape, and this was really done for two reasons. Given that the site is so remote, we wanted it to sort of feel natural as something almost primitive and virtually untouched by man. And secondly, the owners were avid surfers and wanted to be outside as much as possible, either on the water, on the deck, or at the beach. And here you can see the setting. It's actually perched on a cliff overlooking a private beach. The home is entirely off the grid, complete with solar panels and a cistern on site. And the design is a combination of volumes and outdoor decks. And it's also a dog trot plan and includes a living and kitchen volume that overlooks the beach with the bedroom and the bath in the rear. And in between is a covered outdoor sitting area and breezeway. And this small court acts as the formal entry into both spaces, but it also allows one to enjoy the weather, protected from the wind and the ocean spray. And here's just an image of the sort of outdoor court and breezeway. The structural system is wood, using Western red cedar throughout, and the building is also raised slightly above grade, so like our house, it sort of rests lightly on the land. The structure was extended on the north facade to accommodate a side porch and create a frame to hold up operable flaps. These flaps are structurally insulated panels made of fiberglass and trimmed out in aluminum. When closed, they provide security and sort of a defensible architecture against the elements. However, when the owners are there, the flaps can be manually opened by a single person using a rigging system of rope and nautical hardware. The house also incorporates passive strategies of cooling. All of the openings along the north side, where the lamp is, for example, are screened in. So the flaps can actually be adjusted to control breezes throughout the interior. And they also provide shade and overhead cover for the outdoor walkway. The east and north facades are clad in Western red cedar. Again, the cedar is termite resistant. It's a vernacular building material in the Bahamas and will naturally silver over time, kind of making the building just visually more quiet. But on the other hand, the sort of the south and west facades, they are entirely solid, and that was done to block views of an adjacent building and the road. And without the window openings, this enabled us to skin these two sides in a synthetic thatch. The thatch is made by a Florida-based company called Enduried, and sort of the primitive nature of the material makes it feel as if the house was constructed with local materials. But notably, it was also provided a great technical solution for us, as it can withstand long-term UV exposure, it can withstand 150-mile-an-hour hurricane winds, and it's fireproof, whereas real thatch would have posed a significant threat to fire. And this is just an up-close image of the thatch. But again, to kind of create a sense of warmth and make the interior space feel sort of equally natural to the exterior, we used tongue and groove Western red cedar paneling for the walls. We also designed a large picture window looking east to frame the view of the ocean beyond. And here it is kind of on a sunny day with incredibly calm and turquoise waters. But in contrast, it can be rainy sometimes and feels very raw, like Mother Nature is just beating down your door with the crashing waves of the Atlantic. And so, you know, as an architectural device, the window really does make you distinctly aware of the contrast between inside and out, of weather and the seasons, the wind and the sense of security inside. And juxtaposed kind of with the dark wood interior, it creates kind of a heightened sense of contrast between light and dark. The next project was an interesting kind of renovation addition project in Coconut Grove. The original house was a rare case study house, which was designed by Trip Russell in 1948. It was in immaculate condition, and it just felt like you had stepped into a time capsule. You could feel the history and the material presence of the place. It also felt very tropical and like it belonged in the grove, with an old growth canopy of trees over the entire site, as well as a huge 100-year-old sort of banyan tree at the center of the lot. However, the house was only 1,100 square feet, and had the site not been as big as it was, it surely would have been demolished and replaced with something bigger. But fortunately, there was enough land where we could preserve the existing house while adding an addition of more than 3,000 square feet. Making landscape a priority, we ultimately designed a courtyard condition with a one-story kitchen wing and a two-story bedroom living wing with almost all of the rooms overlooking the banyan tree. And this is an image of the front facade with the new addition. You can see the separate volume, which is distinctly different than the form of the original building. And when we were building that, we worked around all of the existing trees. And in keeping them, I think it maintains a sense of history to the site that would have otherwise been erased. And also by building up, we were able to create kind of a treehouse experience to really celebrate the existing canopy. And here's just a picture of a second-story bedroom up in the trees. But the building skin and material palette of the new construction were designed to complement the existing structure. Given that the two-story wing was larger than the existing structure, it really was critical for the new building to appear as lightweight as possible. And so the reading of concrete, which is almost a universal residential structural system here in South Florida, would have been too heavy against the reading of the low-slung wood roof of the original house. And so we sought a lighter and quieter solution, designing a hybrid structural system of steel, concrete, and wood. The two-story wing is built out of steel and concrete, where we have steel columns and beams in some places and concrete beams in others, and columns in others. And as you can see in these photos, this allowed for a very thin floor and ceiling slabs. And then here's a view of the kitchen wing. And because it was a single story, we were able to deploy a kind of a lightweight wood and concrete structural system. But I think kind of most importantly, the ethos of the original house remains, while the new construction furthers for the tropical nature of Russell's original design. Each wing, including the original structure, they're only one room deep, very narrow, in fact, at only 15 feet wide. And the warmth and the simplicity of the material palette was also preserved. The exposed wood detailing was also carried into the new kitchen wing, and then Russell's original design also featured concrete floors, which were refinished and continued throughout the new construction. And lastly, the exposed beams and outriggers of the existing structure were kept intact, despite the necessary requirements to bring the home up to today's more stringent building code. So we had added insulation on top of the existing roof in order to maintain that. This next project is in South Miami. It is a 6,000 square foot home that was just completed. And it's basically a completely opposite approach from using steel and glass as a way of creating kind of a light architecture. In this case, we challenged ourselves to design a concrete house that was tropical and try to make the actual reading of the concrete feel as lightweight as possible. Like Malaga, the previous project, the house is designed as a courtyard complex, but in this case comprised of 6 buildings, all 1 room deep with 5 pocket gardens nested around the perimeter. These pocket gardens help to sort of break up the facade and inject landscape throughout the entire project. This is just a view of the interior where you can see sort of the landscape sort of punctuating the project, and it can be seen through the different living spaces. And here is an aerial view of the house under construction. You know, the buildings are covered by a single continuous roof featuring precast concrete fingers that cantilever 5 feet over the exterior facade. And then to sort of counterbalance the rigor and rectilinear nature of the exterior, the interior space includes a sweeping and more organic roof overhang. And these are just a couple of images of the precast concrete fingers on the front facade. And views showing the curvilinear roof on the courtyard. The interior courtyard features a large pool and landscaping with expansive glass openings, sort of making this the real heart of the house. But I would say the sort of main innovation on this project was in the assembly. The structural system includes steel columns, but the rest of the house is concrete. And to make the wall and roof look as light as possible, we cantilevered the exterior walls and thus, in a sense, recessed the tie beam and foundation. The precast concrete fingers are also cantilevered beyond the roof slab. And so to make the tie beam and foundation disappear even further, we painted them a dark green. And I think all of those details really make the building feel as if it hovers over the land. And makes what is in reality kind of a massive roof feel quite light. The surface of the facade, you know, is also tropical in the sense that it's an actual expression of the sun. So with the concrete fingers casting ever-changing shadows throughout the day. We did a series of sun studies across the facade during the design phase, and you can see that here in this rendering. But also as well as in real life here under construction. And these are some images under construction. And a final image of the completed project. So I'll conclude tonight with the discussion about a 600 square foot cabin in Eleuthera. This is another project that we are physically building for ourselves. Which we started a couple of years ago and is almost complete. But the intent was to create kind of a small house, big life experience where we could trade in the ailments of modern life for the rewards of outdoor living. The site is located on kind of a narrow split of land with the Atlantic on one side and a protected harbor on the other. And we're set back about 300 feet from the water, but we can get direct views and breezes off of the Atlantic. And it's in such an incredible location that our first design goal was to place nature at the forefront of the project. You know, given its size, the structure is sort of naturally subordinate to its surroundings. And then we also started this project actually before doing the Thatch house. And designed the same operable flaps, which could be opened by a single person using a pulley system. And this was done so that we could create a living space that is totally enveloped by the surrounding landscape. You know, you feel immersed within the sea grapes and the pine trees and have an immediate view out to the Atlantic. We also relied on a natural material palette, again using western red cedar shingles and cladding that would weather to blend in seamlessly with the surrounding trees. And because we were constructing it, our second goal was to make sure just 2 people could build it on site. So the cabin is actually designed to be prefabricated, flat packed, and shipped in a 40-yard shipping container. We referenced some other prefabricated cabins when we were doing some research, looking at, Prouvé's Maison Tropicale, as well as Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion House. In both cases, innovation was central to their ideas. And the Dymaxion House, which made efficient use of materials, was a factory manufactured kit, which could be assembled on site. But for us, a key design consideration was ease of shipment and assembly. But the main innovation was creating a structural design strategy that merges traditional stick frame and post and beam construction, which reduced waste, but it primarily allowed just a couple of people to put it together. We actually built the structure in our backyard in Miami, and then disassembled it and loaded up all of the pieces in a shipping container and shipped it through Bimini Shipping, which is a boat that leaves right out of the Miami River, just a few blocks away from our house. And then here are a few photos of it being put back together. Amazingly, I have to give Jake tremendous credit for basically building this entire thing by himself. But he reassembled the first floor by himself in just 11 days while camping out on site. And then the second floor went up in just 3 days with the help of 3 local carpenters. And that we were looking at kind of these prefabricated projects, it was sort of most important to us to create a place that was both contextual and somehow familiar. And to that end, the design relies on the instinctual logic of the primitive hut and references the gabled cottages of nearby Harbor Island, which is a tiny village very close to where we are that's full of British colonial architecture. But the Bahamas is also influenced by the Creole tradition, and so we sought inspiration from the Creole cabinet loggia typology as well. And the cabin essentially abstracts and reduces that concept to sort of meet our functional needs. The downstairs acts as both loggia and living space, while the sleeping area and bathrooms are located in a secondary cabinet in the eaves. Let's see. But that being said, we wanted to create an entirely different experience upstairs. Every space didn't need to have the same view. We designed sculptural skylights above the beds to emphasize views of the night sky and just the amazing stars that come out at night because there's just zero light pollution out there. And then rather than creating large windows that grant expansive views of the ocean, we designed small picture windows at the eye level of the beds to create sort of more poetic, framed views of the blue horizon while also allowing for cross ventilation. The bedroom spaces are divided and enclosed by simple curtains. On the one hand, this gives us a lot of flexibility just depending on who's there. And it still allows for cross breezes. But the curtains also create texture and a sense of softness upstairs. They kind of billow in the breeze and provide a really beautiful filter for these pretty dramatic rays of light coming through the skylights. They also create very simple and intimate spaces. The nice thing about doing projects for yourselves is that you can really test out your ideas that you don't always get to do otherwise. And so with that being said, that sort of concludes the discussion and hopefully sets the framework for the exhibit next door. Certainly the common themes of structure, materiality, vernacular building strategies, and landscape are evident in this project. But this one in particular is also starting to reflect kind of our growing interests in the sort of emotional qualities of space. So thanks again for coming, and if there's any time left, I don't even know if there is, we can open it up for questions.
So we have a few minutes for some questions. And we can continue in the next room. So maybe y'all. Your questions here, and you're welcome to meet the Brillharts afterward in the exhibition. So.
What was the reasoning to make the hut in wood instead of steel that you made in the past? Was it more of a local type of product, or what was the reasoning behind it?
We chose wood, one, because it was less expensive. Two, because I could cut it and modify it for any reason very quickly with hand tools. Out in the woods there's not welders accessible, and there's no lifts or mechanics to lift up heavy pieces. We explored using aluminum, but again, the cost became significant, and the wood gave us the rigidity, and it just was just that much easier. If we did a lot of them, though, we would start to, the chassis itself would be aluminum or